The violins were still playing when my daughter leaned in and said, "Mom, we need to go. Now." I remember the way her fingers gripped my wrist, not dramatic, not panicked, but firm, final. Her eyes were steady, trained on something behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't ask questions. I just blinked at her, confused by the quiet urgency in her voice. It was my parents' 40th anniversary party. There were candles floating in glass bowls, white roses spilling over gold-rimmed vases, crystal chandeliers catching every bit of light above the country club ballroom. It was the kind of evening they had always loved, elegant, rehearsed, admired. The kind of event where image wasn't just everything, it was the only thing. But my daughter, Lily Harper, 16 and sharp-eyed, wasn't looking at the roses or the chandeliers. She was watching people. And in that moment, she saw something I hadn't. If you've lived long enough, you learn that betrayal doesn't always come in slammed doors or shouted words. Sometimes it walks in wearing a tuxedo and offers you champagne. My name is Claire Harper. I'm 34, divorced, 2 kids, freelance designer. Some days I sell handmade cards online to keep the lights on. Other days I teach beginner watercolor to retirees at the community center. Not the kind of life my parents ever imagined for their only daughter. My parents are Charles and Evelyn Whitmore Chuck and Evie to their friends. To me, they've always been something between royalty and employers. My father built a real estate empire. My mother curated the image that went with it. Nothing in our household growing up was accidental, not my piano lessons, not my posture, not the man I married. I spent most of my 20s believing I had finally done it right when I married Andrew Sinclair, the son of one of Dad's business partners. Drew was polished, ambitious, and utterly fluent in my parents' language of status. They adored him, even when he started pulling away, even when he began correcting my tone in front of guests, even when he came home late and smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. I found out about the affair with his assistant Kayla, 25, and sharp as a knife a year ago. The divorce was cold and expensive. He moved into a condo downtown. I moved with Lily and my 8-year-old son Jake into a modest rental with cracked linoleum and a view of the neighbor's trampoline. I thought that would be the hard part, starting over. I didn't realize the harder part would be deciding who was still my family. To my surprise, my parents called more. They invited us to Sunday dinner. They dropped off gifts for Jake's birthday. They offered to help. It felt like they were choosing me finally. Not Drew, not Image, me. But Lily wasn't convinced. "They're trying to fix you," she said one night while doing homework at the kitchen table. "Like you're something they can patch up and put back into their narrative." I laughed, trying not to let her words land. "They're showing love the way they know how." She looked at me and said nothing. That was worse than any argument. Jake, on the other hand, lit up when they visited. My father took him to baseball games, slipped him $100 bills for candy, and books told him stories about when you take over the family business someday. My mother beamed at him with the kind of pride I used to try and earn. When the gold-embossed invitation to the anniversary party arrived, I felt hope again. A grand affair at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Maybe this was it, rebuilding, reclaiming, being seen. I spent weeks helping my mother with the guest list. I altered a dress from before the divorce because I couldn't afford a new one. I even made a photo album of their 40 years together, curated with care. Lily watched me glue captions onto pages with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "Because family shows up," I said, more to myself than to her. What I didn't know then, what she was already starting to suspect, was that showing up doesn't mean you're welcome. And sometimes the people who raised you are the same ones planning to quietly remove you from the story. The day of the party bloomed like a postcard. Early June sun stretched across the lawn of the Oak Ridge Country Club, casting everything in that forgiving golden light my mother always said was perfect for photos. I helped Lily with her hair. She resisted the emerald green dress my mother had sent. "It's not me," she muttered, but eventually gave in with a sigh. "Just for a few hours," I promised. "It'll make Grandma happy." She didn't answer, just stared at herself in the mirror like she already knew what I didn't. We arrived a little past 6. The lobby was transformed, white roses everywhere, string quartet in the corner, champagne flutes already in motion. I took a breath and adjusted my dress. My parents stood near the entrance like visiting royalty. My father, Charles Whitmore, in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My mother, Evelyn, radiant in silver beading. Her smile stretched wide as she kissed the air near my cheeks. "Claire, darling, you look comfortable. And Lily, what a color on you. I knew emerald would bring out your eyes. Her compliments always felt like subtle edits." Jake had barely stepped in before my father swept him up with exaggerated joy. "There's my boy, special seat for you right next to Grandpa tonight, head table." No mention of Lily. Barely a glance at me, but I swallowed it. This was their night. The ballroom filled quickly. Faces I half recognized from golf tournaments and charity auctions. Old business partners, second wives, third cousins. I smiled through rehearsed conversations, shaking hands and accepting sympathy for the divorce as if I were accepting awards. "It's been hard, but we're adjusting. The kids are resilient. No, I'm not dating." Then I saw them. Near the door. Andrew Drew Sinclair, my ex-husband, looking freshly pressed in a navy suit. Kayla, the reason for the divorce, stood beside him like she owned the room. My stomach dropped. I turned to my sister-in-law Rachel and whispered, "Did you know they were coming?" She looked away. "Your mother sent them a personal invitation." "I assumed you knew." Of course she had. My parents greeted Drew and Kayla like long-lost heirs, hugging, laughing, complimenting her dress. When my eyes finally met my mother's across the room, she gave a delicate shrug. "Bygones, darling. Drew's practically family." I retreated to the bar and let the ice in my glass keep me upright. Across the room, Lily stood still, her phone in her hand, watching everyone with narrowed eyes. She was texting, but not to friends. She was gathering something. And I, still caught in a fog of old instincts, chose not to ask. The night blurred into a stream of polite conversation and rehearsed smiles. Jake was glowing. He'd been moved to the seat between Grandpa and Drew, laughing like it was the best night of his life. Lily, though, hadn't touched her plate. I spotted her across the ballroom in quiet conversation with my Aunt Linda, Evelyn's sister. They stopped talking when I approached. Smiles too quick. Eyes that didn't match their mouths. "Everything okay, I asked?" "Just catching up," Linda said lightly. "Lily's quite the observer," she added too brightly. "We were discussing family history." Before I could press further, a chime rang out. My father raised his glass. The room hushed. 40 years ago, Chuck Whitmore began. "I made the best business decision of my life." Polite laughter. "Marriage, my friends, is about vision, legacy. Sometimes we must prioritize the future over temporary discomforts." His gaze skimmed across the room, rested briefly on Drew, then Jake, then me. Tonight, we're not just celebrating the past, we're securing the future. Glasses clinked. Applause followed. A few confused looks. I caught Lily's eye across the room. She wasn't confused. She was confirming something. I didn't know it yet, but my father hadn't thrown this party to honor the past. He'd orchestrated it to announce a future I had no place in. Dinner arrived like clockwork, perfectly plated, perfectly timed. I tried to enjoy it. I really did. The steak was tender, the wine was fine. But my mouth had gone dry. My father and Drew were leaning in close over Jake, whispering and laughing, their heads bent together like old business partners. Jake seemed to beam under the attention, his little shoulders squared like he belonged there. Lily, on the other hand, kept glancing at her phone, tapping beneath the table. She hadn't eaten a bite. Her jaw was set. I leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay?" She nodded. Too fast. From where I sat, I could see my mother showing Kayla yes. Kayla, the family jewelry that once had my name written on small paper tags in my mother's vanity. Emerald earrings, the pearl bracelet my grandmother wore at her own wedding. Evelyn touched Kayla's wrist and smiled the smile she used when she was about to replace something without asking. My seat, it turned out, wasn't next to Jake. It was closer to the corner, near distant cousins and business wives. When I approached the table earlier, there was no name card for me. "We didn't think you'd mind," Evelyn had said, glancing at the guest list as if it had slipped her mind. They had always been masters of subtle omission. After the entree, I stepped into the hallway to collect myself. As I turned the corner, I nearly collided with Aunt Linda again. She flinched. "Brooke's sorry, Claire. I've been meaning to talk to you alone." I blinked. No one had called me Brooke in years. That was the name I'd left behind with my marriage. "Something wrong?" Linda hesitated, lowering her voice. "I overheard your father and Drew earlier. They were talking about transferring assets. Something about restructuring for liability purposes. Your name came up, along with words like unreliable, unfit." The hallway swayed a little. I held onto the railing. "Richard Charles? He's always liked control," she added quickly. "But this feels different." Before I could ask more, my mother appeared cool and polished as ever. "Linda, the photographer, is waiting for the sister's photo." Linda offered a quick apology and vanished, leaving me with nothing but her warning. When I returned, Lily was gone. Jake now sat on Drew's lap, their faces close together over a phone screen, laughing at something I wasn't invited to see. Evelyn stood behind them, beaming at them, not me. "Where's Lily?" I asked. My mother sighed. "She's been moody lately. Said something about getting some air. Maybe check the terrace." I found her outside, back turned to the party phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, that's exactly what the document said. I need to know if that's even legal." She saw me and ended the call. "Mom, how's the party? Who were you talking to? Just..." "A friend." She tucked her phone away. Then, "Have you noticed how much time Grandpa is spending with Drew?" "They're probably talking business," I said, but the words came out thin. She studied my face. "Mom, when's the last time you looked in Grandpa's office?" I blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Last time we visited, I needed a quiet place to study. Grandma told me to use it while Grandpa was golfing." She looked right at me. "There were documents. About you. About Drew. Custody. Property. Red flags marking entire pages." A breeze picked up her hair. "You're more upset that I saw them than what they said." Before I could respond, the doors opened and servers began bringing out the cake. "Just watch them tonight," Lily whispered. "How they look at Drew. How they place Jake between them. How you don't appear in the slideshow." It hadn't started yet, but when the first image flashed across the screen, 40 years of love and legacy in gold script I already knew. The photos played Chuck and Evelyn on their honeymoon, business launches, children smiling, Brian and his wife, Drew holding Jake at last year's holiday brunch. I appeared once, maybe twice. Lily only in a distant group shot. My seat at their table had been removed, and now slowly they were erasing me from the story altogether. Fan 4. The plan to take it all. The moment we got in the car, Lily locked the doors. She didn't speak right away, just stared out the windshield while Jake in the back seat played with a light-up yo-yo someone had handed him at the party. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then, softly, "Pull over. Somewhere quiet." I did. We parked in an empty strip mall lot just outside a closed bakery. Streetlights hummed above us. Lily unlocked her phone and turned on the interior light. "I didn't just call a friend earlier," she said. "I called Aunt Sam." My throat tightened. "Samantha, that can't be right. She hasn't spoken to this family in 15 years. Lily nodded. "Because Grandpa did to her? Exactly what he's trying to do to you." She handed me the phone. Text messages. Dozens. Weeks long. "Sam, watch how he treats your brother compared to your mom. Has he started saying things like legacy or stability? That's code. Don't let them announce anything in public. It's a trap." I scrolled in disbelief. Each thread was a warning. All the pieces Lily had seen and I had missed. "Mom, I snuck into Grandpa's study during the party. I took pictures. She opened her gallery. I saw scanned copies of legal drafts, property transfer papers with Drew listed as custodial parent of Jake custody modification forms, with notes in my father's handwriting, Claire unstable, Art income unreliable, Ethan better off in structure, trust fund realignments naming Drew as trustee in event of unforeseen maternal absence. My hands trembled. I was holding proof, cold, calculated, and already in motion. Lily's voice wavered, but her eyes never left mine. "Grandpa doesn't want a daughter. He wants an heir." And Jake's the safest bet since I won't play by his rules. I felt a sickness rising in my stomach. How do you even know what these documents mean? She hesitated. Aunt Sam's lawyer friend explained them to me. I sent over photos. She said, "What they're doing might not just be immoral, it could be illegal." That was when I realized how deep I'd been buried. How long I had wanted to believe my family wasn't capable of this. "I couldn't let you stay tonight," Lily said, voice low. "I think they were going to announce something, maybe that Drew was getting the house. Or that Jake would live with him, something public, something binding. So you couldn't fight back without looking crazy." The words hit like ice in my lungs, because I knew in my bones it was true. My parents hadn't just invited my ex to their anniversary. They had built the evening around him. "I'm so sorry you had to carry this alone," I whispered. I wanted to believe they finally accepted me." Lily shook her head. "They never did, Mom. They just accepted how well you hid your disappointment." She reached across and took my hand. "But you don't have to pretend anymore." We sat in the dark, mother and daughter, with one child sleeping and one secret broken open between us. I barely slept that night. After putting Jake to bed, I sat at the kitchen table while Lily sorted her photos and messages into a clean folder on her laptop. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who'd carried this weight far too long. By 6 a.m., I called my older brother Mark in Seattle. He didn't sound surprised. "I never liked what Dad and Drew were planning," he admitted after a pause. "I just didn't think they'd go this far." "You knew," I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "About the property, the trust Jake." Another pause. "Some of it. They said it was about tax strategy, keeping things clean." "I didn't know it meant cutting you out." He promised to forward every email, every message where Dad and Drew discussed family arrangements. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. By mid-morning, I had an appointment with Jennifer Morales, the lawyer Samantha had used all those years ago. Her office was quiet, nothing showy. Just rows of well-worn books and 2 chairs that didn't try to impress me. She read silently while Lily explained. Then she looked up and said, "They're counting on you being too ashamed, too overwhelmed, or too isolated to fight." "I'm not isolated anymore," I said. "I have my daughter. I have evidence. And I'm done being quiet." Jennifer outlined the first step: file an emergency petition to freeze any property transfers involving the family trust and the deed to the house. Second, notify the court of potential custody manipulation. Third, document every interaction with Drew and my parents. I thought of Jake, how they held him between them like a future to be claimed. "They've been planting things in his head," I said, "about boarding school, about a real family legacy." Jennifer nodded. "That's called parental conditioning. Judges take it seriously, especially when one child is being groomed and the other," she looked at Lily, "is being erased." Lily met her gaze without flinching. By the end of the meeting, the papers were filed. That night, I did something I never imagined. I called my parents. My mother answered. "Claire," she said too evenly, "I was hoping you'd call to apologize." "I'm calling," I said, "but not to apologize." There was a pause. Then my father's voice joined hers on speaker. "This family has always handled things privately. You airing grievances after a party isn't the way." "What you did at that party wasn't family," I said. "It was ambush dressed as champagne." I told them what I knew: the documents, the audio, Samantha's testimony, Mark's messages. My voice never wavered. My father finally said, "You're being emotional, Claire. This is exactly why we worried, and this," I said, "is exactly why you won't control my life anymore." Then Lily, who had been listening beside me, leaned in. "You underestimated the wrong generation, Grandpa." I ended the call. No threats, no pleading, just silence. And for once, I didn't feel it. 3 days after the call, I received a letter from my father's attorney, a warning dressed as formality. It stated that any unauthorized interference with Wallace family assets could be interpreted as a breach of agreement. The irony was staggering. I'd never signed a thing. Jennifer wasn't surprised. "They're testing your fear," she said, reviewing the letter. "That's how power works when it starts to lose control. It postures." The legal strategy continued. We filed a cease transfer order on the Victorian house. Jennifer submitted a request for family trust documents to be independently reviewed, and Lily compiled a meticulous record of everything: texts, recordings, time-stamped photos, emails from Mark. But the hardest part wasn't in courtrooms or offices. It was Jake. He'd grown quieter, more withdrawn since the party. He still cuddled up to me at night, still asked for one more story. But I could see that flicker of confusion in his eyes. And it broke something in me I didn't know was still whole. One afternoon, I overheard him tell Lily, "Grandpa says if I move in with Dad, I'll get a dog. And a bedroom with a telescope." He said it softly, like it was a secret he shouldn't carry. We started family therapy soon after. Not for conflict resolution, but for protection. For truth. The therapist, Dr. Alan Price, was a calm man with careful eyes. Jake fidgeted through the first session, twisting the sleeve of his shirt. Dr. Price asked, "Do you feel like the grown-ups are asking you to choose sides?" Jake nodded slowly. "They say Mom is busy, that she doesn't have time or money for the big things." I kept my face still. I didn't cry. That wasn't what Jake needed from me. "What are the big things?" Dr. Price asked gently. "Boarding school, trips, a real family name." The word real lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Later that evening, Lily came into my room holding her laptop. "Mom," she said, "I found something. It was a financial trail. Payments made from my father's business account into Drew's private legal fund, timed exactly around the party. 1 week before, 1 day after. Each marked for custodial planning." Lily's hands shook as she scrolled. "They were paying to build a case," she said, "while we were smiling for photos." The thought struck me. Had they ever intended for me to show up to that party as anything but a placeholder? A box to tick before cutting me out completely was the dress my mother sent. A costume for the stage. When we told Jennifer, she nodded grimly. "This confirms financial collusion to interfere with custody," she said. "We're adding it to the motion." As the case built momentum, the reaction came swift and cold. My father stopped returning calls. My mother sent a short email. "We are heartbroken you've chosen to drag this into the public." I didn't respond. Not to that. Not when Drew showed up 2 weeks later with a proposal. We met in a coffee shop. I kept my phone visible on the table. "This isn't sustainable," he said, eyes flicking to the recorder. "The lawyers. The damage. Jake's in the middle of something ugly." "Then stop putting him there," I said. He tried to soften. Said he'd consider stepping back from the property deal if I agreed to a shared custody revision. Informal, flexible, beneficial. Beneficial to whom I asked. "To Ethan," he said. Then he corrected himself to Jake. That slip told me everything. He wasn't trying to win Jake's heart. He was trying to win legacy. "You don't get to write the ending, Drew," I said, standing up. "You're just in it." I left before he could answer. Outside, the air felt different. Crisper. Like something in me had finally settled. Still, the question lingered: if Drew was beginning to unravel, what would my parents do next? They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by the daughter they'd spent decades training to obey. 2 months after the anniversary party, Jennifer called. "It's time," she said. "They've stalled every motion they could, but with Lily's records, Brian's emails, and Drew's slip-ups, we have enough." The hearing wasn't public, not yet, but it was formal. And in that courtroom, everything my parents had protected with charm and silence began to show cracks. We presented the draft emails between my father and Drew about custodial restructuring, the financial transfers from Wallace Development labeled family strategy, voice recordings from the party including my father saying it's time Brooke stepped aside for the good of the Wallace name. Most damning of all was Lily's testimony. 16, calm, unflinching. She told the judge about the night on the terrace, the documents, the red flags. The moment she knew her family wasn't protecting her mother, they were erasing her. When asked why she got involved, she said, "Because I was the only one paying attention. And because she's my mom." Drew's team attempted to discredit her as emotionally influenced. Jennifer responded with a copy of his payment logs. If a teenager can uncover a legal conspiracy, she said maybe we should be listening to her instead of silencing her. Outside the courtroom, my mother didn't look at me. My father did. Just once. That old look disappointment mingled with disbelief, like he couldn't fathom how I'd learned to stand. "You could have come to us quietly," he muttered. "And you could have told the truth," I replied. For once, he had no answer. The judge's decision didn't strip them of their wealth or erase decades of control, but it did freeze the trust restructuring, protect Jake's current custody arrangement, and crucially barred Drew from assuming sole ownership of the Victorian house. The court appointed a neutral third-party trustee to oversee any future decisions involving family assets. It wasn't a victory parade, but it was enough. After the hearing, Brian called. I saw the filing. "You really did it." "I didn't do it alone," I said. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Lily, she's Dad's blind spot. He never saw her coming. For weeks after the Wallace house went quiet. No more emails, no more proposals disguised as family dinners. But silence didn't mean surrender. I stayed cautious. Documents stayed filed. Visitations stayed structured. And every conversation with Jake ended the same way: you are loved. Not for what you give, just for who you are." One morning, Lily knocked on my door, holding an envelope. "You might want to read this," she said. It was a letter from my mother, handwritten, careful cursive. Brooke families survive by tradition, but not all traditions deserve survival. I cannot undo what's been done. But I see now that silence is not the same as peace. Give Jake our love. Tell Lily. She was right. There was no apology. But there was an admission. That was more than I ever expected. That night, Lily and I sat on the porch. The summer air smelled like pine and rain. Jake slept upstairs hugging a toy fox Lily had bought him last Christmas. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But we don't have to wait for them to." She was quiet for a while, then smiled. "You know, if this were a movie, this would be the part where we say something profound." "Yeah, but I think the truth's better." "Which part?" "That you didn't need saving Mom. You just needed someone to look you in the eye and say, 'I see it too.'" And that's what Lily gave me, a mirror that didn't distort. A daughter who stood where I'd once been at the edge of a lie and stepped back before it swallowed her. 6 months later, the Wallace family gathered again. Not at a country club, not for a celebration, but for a legal mediation, final arrangements on the trust, custody stipulations, and a permanent record of what had been attempted and what had failed. This time I came prepared. Jennifer beside me, Lily just behind. Jake stayed home drawing rockets and dinosaurs and pretending the world was still simple. My father opened with civility, polished, collected. "We're here to avoid further fragmentation." My mother sat stiff, a silk scarf knotted tightly at her throat. She didn't speak. Their lawyer outlined the final revisions. My ownership of the Victorian house was affirmed irrevocably. The children's inheritance divided equally locked until age 25. No future trust or asset decisions would involve Drew without my written consent. Then came the clause about family access. Supervised, limited, conditional on documented respect for my parental decisions. My father read that line twice. "So we're no longer grandparents. We're vetted visitors." "Your family," Jennifer replied, "just not immune to consequence." The documents were signed, no ceremony, no photographs, just the shuffle of papers, the scratch of pens, and the end of a lineage of control. On our way out, my mother finally spoke. "You always were more like Samantha than I cared to admit." "That used to be an insult," I replied. "Now I take it as a compliment." She looked down, smoothed her gloves. Didn't deny it. Lily and I walked to the car in silence. In the parking lot, she paused. "Do you feel anything tired?" I said. "But lighter." I didn't look back at the building. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed their version of closure. We drove home with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass and faraway rain. When we walked in, Jake ran up holding a drawing. "This one's for you, Mom," he said. "It's us. In a rocket. Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," he whispered. That night, after both kids were asleep, I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on an empty document. I didn't write about pain, or betrayal, or legal battles. I wrote a grocery list. I looked up a family therapist for long-term support. I bookmarked a summer camp Lily might enjoy. I started life again not because I won, but because I finally stopped asking for permission. In the end, there was no apology big enough to fix what they'd broken. But there was something better. A daughter who saw through the lie, a son who still called me first, and a truth no longer buried under politeness and property. The last email I got from my father was short. "You left us no choice." I never replied, because I finally understood I didn't need to explain why I walked away.